I want to welcome you to our Wetland Reserve Easement webinar. We're excited to have you all join us tonight. We want to share information about wetlands, the WRE program, and ways that landowners can get assistance with wetlands on their property. So we have a ton of information to share with you tonight. I'm Kim Cole. I'm the outreach coordinator for Pheasants Forever and Quail Forever in Missouri. I'm going to help moderate tonight's session. Our presenters for the webinar are Kelsey DeZelia Jenkins, Colby Moeller, and Jeff Folkerts, our three wetland specialist farm bill biologists that we have on our team in Missouri. I'm going to turn it over to them to introduce themselves in just a moment, but I do want to mention a few other things before we get started tonight. We are recording tonight's session. And the presentation is going to be made available. That recording will be made available afterwards on our Missouri Quail Forever YouTube page. So look for that recording to post there. We're also going to share a link to the recording to everyone who registered for the webinar. So all of our registrants tonight will get a copy of that link as well. Everyone's microphones are muted and your cameras are turned off. So you can only see our cameras and only hear or see our cameras and screens and only hear our presenters. So everybody can just sit back and relax and enjoy the webinar. And then since your microphones are muted, if anyone has questions during the webinar, we ask that you please type those into the Q&A feature. So you can kind of see that little Q&A logo there. Just click on that and you'll be able to submit questions through that Q&A feature. Some of those we'll try to answer with replies as we go along during the webinar. And then at the end, we're also going to take some time to discuss some of those questions and answer some of those questions live with everyone. So now that's, I think, all I have for reminders. So I'd just like to go ahead and turn it over to our wetland specialists. We'll let them introduce themselves before they kick off and get into their presentation. So Kelsey, I'll go ahead and turn it over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Kim. Thanks, everybody, once again for joining us this evening. My name is Kelsey DeZelia Jenkins, and I'm the wetland specialist located out of Jackson, Missouri.
I'm Colby Moeller, and I'm the wetland specialist out of Fulton, Missouri.
Hi, I'm Jeff Folkerts. I'm the wetland specialist out of Chillicothe, Missouri.
Okay, great. So we will get into it, and thank you for joining us again. And this is the Wetland Reserve Easement webinar. And through all this, I'd just like you to keep in mind WRE is a restoration program. So first things first, how do you define a wetland? There are two separate definitions here, biological and regulatory. You'll see the biological focuses mainly on water presence. The regulatory really encompasses both the water presence, the hydrology, the hydrophytic vegetation, as well as, of course, the hydric soils. Why are wetlands important? Starting with surface water storage, according to an article from Purdue University, a 1 acre wetland 1 foot deep can hold approximately 333,000 gallons of water. Many of our privately owned easements range from 20 to about 900 acres. And then if we consider the easements owned by the Missouri Department of Conservation, for example, Black Island in Southeast Missouri is around 9,000 acres. And then furthermore, if you look at the connectivity brought about by adjacent landowners enrolling in WRE, well, I'm not going to do that math, but the water retention in itself is outstanding. Floodwater retention. This is something that should hit kind of close to home for a lot of Missourians. Wetlands act as natural buffers and storage basins during large rain or storm events. During flooding events, they assist in mitigating floodwater by slowing the water's velocity as it spreads out across the wetland. Wetlands are also key in decreasing erosion events for this same reason. Groundwater storage and recharge. This mainly refers to the water being accessed as a local drinking water source and an important contributor to local stream flow. Nutrient cycling and sediment retention. As I said earlier, as water enters a wetland and it spreads out, it decreases velocity, allowing suspended chemicals, nutrients, contaminants that can include nitrogen, phosphorus, and agricultural pesticides to settle and bind to the roots of the wetland plants or be transferred to the sediment, which may later be absorbed by wetland plants. according to the Vermont Department of Environmental Conservation, as much as 90% of sediments that are present in runoff may be removed if the water simply passes through a wetland. The binding features of wetland soils and vegetation increases the water quality that is returned to the watershed. Flora and fauna, the fun stuff. Wetlands are among the most biologically productive ecosystems. In Missouri alone, there are nearly 400 species of wildlife that depend directly on wetlands. This includes around 230 species of birds, 38 species of fish, about 80 species of amphibians and reptiles, and 34 species of mammals. So moving on to recreation. This can basically be whatever you want to make it. Hunting, hiking, kayaking, fishing, photography, and as you see there, birding opportunities. And then lastly, looking at economics. Flooding events have cost the US billions of dollars in damage. I'm sure we all remember well Hurricane Katrina. According to an article put out by the US EPA, some of that damage is accredited to the lack of wetlands in the vicinity. All right, moving on to the history of wetlands. Over a period of 200 years, the lower 48 has lost an estimated 53% of their original wetlands, and an estimated 87% of wetland loss was from the mid-1950s to mid-1970s, and that was strictly due to agricultural conversion. Prior to European settlement, wetlands encompassed about 11% of Missouri, and today we're looking at about a 1.4% figure. This is an important tidbit just to remember where we came from, why we absolutely had to progress, and why we currently do what we do. As you can see by this figure, the majority of wetland loss within the United States has occurred within the mid-latitude states, of which Missouri is a critical part. The Mississippi Flyway stretches from Canada all the way down to the Gulf Coast. This is a heavily used migration corridor. It serves a vital role by creating refuges and stopover points for waterfowl, shorebirds, neotropical migrants, and other bird species during their spring and fall migrations. These are kind of cool figures. On the left, you'll see the map of the historical hydrology and where wetlands were present in Missouri. And on the right, you're seeing how we're trying to put those pieces of the puzzle back together. Very obvious in that north central, those finger looking ones, but trying to restore a lot of that historical hydrology, and we're getting there. Moving on to protection. The 1972 Clean Water Act, administered by EPA and the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, we're specifically looking at Section 404 that established the program to regulate the discharge of dredged and fill material into the waters of the United States, including wetlands. So, cleaning it up. 1985, we're moving on to Food Security Act, administered by the Farm Service Agency and Natural Resource Conservation Service. We're going to specifically look at the provision of this called Swamp Buster. Swamp Buster, like I said, provision of the 1985 and 1990 Farm Bill. There is some different verbiage in there that I'd like to clear up. The 1980, it's the difference between cleared and farmed and cleared and made farmable. I know that's kind of muddy there. So the 1985 Farm Bill was addressing clearing and attempting to farm a wetland. I say attempting because, well, you can try, but what do? They stay wet, they hold water. A producer isn't going to be able to get a viable yield off of something like that. So the 1990 Farm Bill took that a step further with the verbiage farmable. This is relating to producers who began to drain wetlands through ditch systems or converting them so the fields would now produce a viable yield, but at the expense of total wetland destruction. Producers who drained or degraded wetlands for production would forfeit all USDA benefits. But Swamp Buster really opened up the door for a lot of new wetland protection initiatives, some of which are listed there. Originally, WRP, Wetland Reserve Program. Missouri was one of 9 trial states that were authorized to begin accepting offers in late 1992. In the early years of this program, restoration was focused on waterfowl use and seed production. Over the years, that's shifted to those ideas, plus a focus on water quality, biological diversity, flood storage, and the remaining reasons that we covered in previous slides. Our focus is to restore and protect wetland functions and values, enhance the original hydrology, encourage native vegetation, and restore natural topography. We restore wetland features as close to historical conditions as possible on lands that are frequently flood, or are at high risk. Just a side note, these are marginal farmlands. These are ones that farmers cannot count on typically to produce a good yield for them. Wetland teams and biologists were focused on long-term resiliency and expanding floodplains wherever possible. ASAP WRE, or Agriculture Conservation Easement Program, Wetland Reserve Easement. This is administered by USDA, or Natural Resource Conservation Service. It is an open and continuous application period and a voluntary land use easement program. You'll see the 2 different types that are available for enrollment, the perpetual and 30-year, and the differences in that. Missouri currently has about 1,193 easements covering about 162,000 acres, and most of those being perpetual. Eligibility. We are looking at the land and the landowner that needs to be eligible. For the land, it needs to be privately owned or owned by an Indian tribe. The land needs to be capable of those wetland features like wetland hydrology, hydrophytic vegetation, and hydric soils. Restorable acreage must make up at least 50% of the offered acres. And then existing wetlands are not eligible on their own. Moving back to restorable acreage must make up at least 50%. The other 50% can be an existing wetland or an adjacent upland buffer. For the landowner eligibility, you have to have owned it for at least 2 years, along with reported ingress egress, how you get in and out. You have to be AGI compliant, and you have to be conservation compliant, both for highly erodible land conservation and wetland conservation. Moving on to the warranty easement deed. So USDA purchases all land use rights except for these 6 that you see here. Ownership with the right to convey or transfer title, that just means you can divide or sell it. The right to quiet enjoyment, this is a little vague, but I think what I kind of think about it is birding, taking a walk. In June, if you want to go out and just feed the mosquito population, completely up to you. The right to prevent trespass and control access. NRCS cannot allow people onto your property. However, NRCS and associated partners are allowed access. NRCS is not law enforcement, so if you have people trespassing, you're going to have to speak to local authorities about that. The right of undeveloped recreational uses. This is associated with the undeveloped hunting. You can't install any game farms or anything of that manner. The right to extract subsurface resources. If you find subsurface minerals or oils that you're interested in, it needs to be mined laterally from a neighboring or adjacent property, but you need to do that outside of the easement boundary. And then number 6, the right to water uses. This is mainly a Western thing. We really don't deal with this in Missouri. So here are your wetland emphasis teams. Our mission is to restore, enhance, protect, manage, mitigate, and maintain wetlands for private landowners all across Missouri. There are 4 teams in the state composing of NRCS staff, which is our engineers, soil scientists, soil conservationists, soil conservation technicians, Then we also have the Missouri Department of Conservation Wetland Services biologists. Then, of course, yours truly with the partner biologists, pheasant that is filled with Ducks Unlimited biologists and Pheasants and Quail Forever. We are your one-stop shop for wetland restoration and management. Our responsibilities in an all-encompassing view, we administer the ASAP WRE program, which includes providing wetland planning and design, wetland management, biological expertise, technical assistance to Missouri landowners and or partners and staff. We interact with a lot of different partners on different levels, including the Corps of Engineers, Department of Natural Resources, Fish and Wildlife Service, for further wetland restoration type program projects. We provide input to NRCS in developing wetland restoration practice standards. And then a good chunk of our time is also composed of drafting compatible use agreements and our annual monitoring events. Compatible use agreements. So as we discussed, the landowner only retains those 6 rights when accepted into the program. So, you know, if you want to do anything, now what? Enter compatible use agreements, or commonly used CUAs. CUAs are a method to return land use rights to the current owner. In order to do anything besides the 6 rights retained, anything, a landowner must have a signed CUA through your local wetland team. These are renewed every 3 to 5 years, or for each landowner. A couple or a few of those are listed there. You see on the screen that the CUA can grant the right back to do. Most of these come with parameters to remain in compliance with the program. For example, there's not to exceed values placed on management and maintenance activities. We typically allow about 33% of the easement acres to be disturbed each year. Food plots, they cannot exceed 5% of the easement acres, and they do have individual size limits. Annual monitoring. This is a task completed by each team each year. There are some easements that fall under the on-site, which is your boots on the ground, and then there's the off-sites where we take a look at aerial imagery. We are mainly checking for compliance, but we are trying to include more biological monitoring aspects as well. Starting with off-site monitoring, you'll see in front of you, I have a couple aerial images of the same easement zoomed in on your right there, and in that yellow circle, I have circled an encroachment issue that landowner or farmer who is farming that south field is encroaching and farming into the easement boundary. So that is a violation, and just something that we are able to pick up on aerial imagery. Moving to on-site monitoring, these boots on the ground. I'll bring your attention back to that left photo with the A and B GPS points. These are photo points, and these are simply just to be able to monitor the vegetation, the area, as years progress. So as we're walking around, what are we finding? Coming into some of our violations, large blinds are a very popular violation. You'll see, I'm not exactly sure what that blind on the left measured out to be, but it's clearly bigger than the 80 square feet that we do allow. And then you'll see that pit of the 2 photos on the right, that's over 200 square feet of a hunting structure. So it's a little too large. Some other popular violations are oversized food plots. These are typically restricted to 1 acre food plots each. And some of our producers do like to go over. And then we'll have more drastic violations. For example, that top right and center picture are both a pond constructed by a landowner out in Bollinger County. This is altering the hydrology and just completely without proper authorization from the wetlands team. So that was a pretty big violation. And then the bottom two pictures are equipment parked on site. You are allowed to park equipment on site as while you're using it. So I guess seasonally to a certain degree. But you can see in this photo that has been there for a while now as the vegetation is growing over it. And then those two tires are just reflective of dump sites. You cannot dump trash on these easements. So after all these violations, what happens if a violation is found? This is kind of a case-by-case scenario, and it also depends on severity. If you're a first-time landowner and you've gone a little over on your food plots, we'll try to give you a phone call, and try to bring you into the office, go over the CUA and the parameters, get everyone on the same page, and just try, it doesn't happen again type thing. The pond violation, that's a lot bigger of an issue here. That's going to warrant a phone call, a violation letter with maps and photos, and a corrective action plan in which the landowner is supposed to or needs to work directly with their local wetland team in order to remediate. So with that, I will turn it over to Colby.
All right, thank you, Kelsey. I'll work on sharing my screen here. Okay, as long as everybody can see that, I'm just going to talk real briefly on the engineering, design, and construction. So this is what you can expect from us when you go into your local FSA office when you are interested in enrolling or applying to the program. Just keep in mind that when you do go in to apply for the program, this is not tying you to anything. This is not binding you to any contracts. This is just telling us that you are seriously interested in going into the next step. And for us, that next step is the pre-planning for this to make sure that the site that you delineate on a map that you're interested in enrolling will meet eligibility requirements and will work for the program. So what we'll do after all of that is we will start with our pre-planning maps from the office before we even come out there. After we have received your application, we are going to create some maps, just get an idea of the lay of the land in terms of elevations, topography, soils, stuff like that. So right here, this is just our basic up-to-date aerial imagery. See what everything's been cropped. You can see pasture ground, forested ground. Next, we'll look at historical imagery. This is typically used for, let's see, if there was at one point a blue line stream or so running through the field that you were interested in enrolling, this type of imagery would let us know about it. And that way we could maybe use something of that type to in our design to bring it back to its natural state, its historic state. In addition to that, we'll look at soils. Keep in mind that our soils maps are pretty coarse in terms of they're not totally accurate to the exact field. So when we actually come out to the site, we'll bring our NRCS soil scientists with us, and they will probe the soil and tell us, is it hydric, is it not? Is it 51% hydric, is it not? And then we'll go from there. In addition to that, we'll use LiDAR. LiDAR is a great modeling tool to get a actually pretty accurate information on topography and elevations and whatnot. So as you can see here, the grayer and redder colors are much higher compared to the green or the lighter green. It just really highlights ditches, sloughs, little holes, and drainage. So with that same LiDAR, we can also produce topographic maps. This is a map for based on half foot contours. And it just is another modeling tool to help us in the planning process. So once we have all those, we'll bring those maps out to you. We're going to do our site visit with you. As you can see on the left, this is our renowned MDC Wetland Services biologist Sean Duckworth meeting with one of our easement landowners. And then you can see kind of this bigger picture is a pretty typical field, what you can expect somebody coming into the office that's interested in enrolling in the program. They got this crop field that is just inundated in water. They can't get any crops into it. I got to make some money on it. What can we do with it? So here we are, we come out, and in the bottom right, you'll just see me with our one of our surveying tools. It's a set 3, and what this one does, and our survey grade equipment and stuff like that, all these different tools will help us produce maps, topographic maps, to very, very accurately create or lay out the elevations of your land. So as you can see on the left here, this is just what you see from the aerial imagery, compared to on the right is what we've actually gone out and shot. Each one of those plus signs is a survey point that we have gotten the northing and easting coordinates and then the elevations, and we can overlay this onto that imagery. And then once we have that, we can kind of get a plan for where we might be able to do some things, and that will go into our WRPO, or Wetland Reserve Plan of Operation. And what this will do, this will kind of show you exactly where we plan on building berms or levees and creating your pooled areas, maybe with some habitat mounds, and we'll break that down into different polygons. In addition to that, we'll also lay out where we plan on managing for herbaceous vegetation as opposed to maybe wooded or vegetation. And this will help guide us through the process. At the same time, during all of this, we have our NRCS engineers working on the plans, the construction plans. As you can see in the top left here is that same picture. And this is showing you the kind of the darker lines there are your berm, and then those wider lines, that snaky looking figure is a creative borrow we like to incorporate into some of our wetlands, gives it a natural look and some water depth variation for different types of migrant birds. And then on the right, top right, you can see those habitat mounds. That's a cross section with a top view on them. And then we have another cross section of kind of the berms you can expect that might be constructed on your land. This one in particular is a 12-foot top. Jeff will go more into the berm layout, but this one's a 12-foot top, 1 to 12 side slopes with your water control structure. And then with the water control structures, we will put a trash rack on the inlet of the pipe, and that'll keep critters and junk out of the pipe and clogging it up ideally. So then comes construction day. We typically do this obviously in the drier months, so usually in the summertime. A video there, that's one of our scrapers going out. In the center, we will actually go out with the construction crew on the day that they plan on installing the box, the water control structure box, and the pipe, and make sure that everything comes out perfectly, is compacted and is solid, won't be moved. And then from there, we're good to go. And then we will come back out again when the contractor is completely done. We'll shoot it with our survey grade equipment and make sure everything is up to our plans and specifications. In the bottom, you can see your trash rack, your animal guard on the pipe, another scraper, and then your water control. This is from the top. This is all you can see from that water control structure now is just that top and the boards that we'll put into it so that you can effectively manage the water levels. And then once all that's done, you just wait maybe a year or two, and you're going to have a very beautiful wetland just like this. This is a stand of switchgrass that we have on our berm. They're looking at a water control structure right now. As you can see in the background, that's one of the creative barrows, still holding water. This is late summer, I believe. So it's looking very, very good. And then this is more of a wintertime, more wintertime pictures. I think the one on the right's more springtime, but hopefully the wetland will be filled with all these types of critters that you can enjoy your quiet recreation and stuff like that. So with that, I will turn it over to Jeff, and he'll continue his little spiel.
Hi, folks. Let me just get my screen up. Okay, and ready to go. Okay, so how do our easements benefit wildlife, and by doing so, not just enhance nature, but also the easement owner's enjoyment? So when we think about what wildlife we want to see on the easement, it's a whole bunch of different things. It's the public might be interested primarily in waterfowl. They might be birders. They might be interested in hunting deer, quail, or pheasants, all sorts of things. Or they might just want somewhere to be able to go outside and enjoy the privacy of some nature of their own. And so when we build our wetlands, we want to encourage all of these things at once, ideally. And some of the ways that we do that are to address basically mimicking natural systems. When we try to mimic nature on an easement, we trying to look at what was there in the past, what soils were there, what communities of plants we expect to have been there. By doing so, we get an idea of what we want to do on the easement in our design. So some of the important things are things like low dikes and levees. These resist damage from flooding. These resist damage from muskrats and beavers, and they also provide really shallow slopes that create a lot of different levels of water and a lot of opportunity for different vegetation to grow. So a shallow topographic gradient is a really important part of building a natural wetland. Another thing is, keep that water both shallow and to have that wide gradient. We create barrows and spoils, which are areas of lower top topography and higher topography that hold water at different levels throughout the year. This lower area you can see is closer into this large creek and will flood from time to time with overbank flow, absorbing it and holding it there, which is beneficial to the easement, but also beneficial to surrounding land. And then we have this higher area up here, which is slightly out of the floodplain and will have smaller, less permanent amounts of water, which are also important to offer services to different animals that utilize different amounts of water at different positions on the landscape. So if you look at this easement from Caldwell County, Missouri, we see some of this design in action. We focus on things like connectivity between different parts of the easement. So say you're a bird, you can fly from area to area. If you're not a bird, say a fish or a small mammal or a reptile or amphibian, you need to have these connected areas of upland, an ability to move between different environments to take advantage of changes. And in this one, I really like this one because it has a lot of barrows. It has a lot of those spoils we were talking about, which sit up out of the barrows and create habitat that birds like to use. And then it also has that upland embedded wetland in the hill slope that is a former pond that's kind of transitioning over time into a wetland as they tend to do. They silt in and they become really useful for small amphibians and reptiles that need those kind of isolated areas. So it's a nice to see a variety of types of water and types of wetlands on the easement as well. When we write our wetland management plans, we try to take these things into account. We suggest both varying the hydrology of the pools seasonally and annually. We help advise landowners on how to maintain desirable mixes of vegetation through disturbance, fire, and when needed, chemicals. We suggest that you draw the water down slowly. This is in the same way that, we build those pools to have a varying hydrology. Drawing them down slowly creates that in another aspect across the whole landscape, across time, across areas that might otherwise be deeper flooded, and then they're shallow. And then in dry years, we really encourage landowners to utilize that access to get in and set back vegetation that may not be bad and may not be good, but we want to keep it in a mix, because that mix is one of the things that provides the best diversity of habitats for different animals. Now, when a lot of people in Missouri think about wetlands, a lot of the focus has been on ducks, waterfowl, geese. There's nothing wrong with that. Those are really important parts of how people enjoy nature on wetlands. And one of the focuses for ducks has been a developing understanding of this idea of moist soil management, which in an emergent wetland is basically using that gradient to encourage the growth of a variety of plants that are adapted to water, they're adapted to flooding, but also offer a high value of food to the animals that use our easements, whether they be waterfowl or other birds, animals, and shorebirds, those kind of things. So they're very important for providing that energy that's needed during the migration. And because they're natural, because they're vegetated and designed or adapted to live in the water, they do better in some ways at providing both habitat for small animals and food for animals across the flooding in a way that isn't always offered when people focus on food plots and cropping wetlands. It's they have the benefit of having seeds that will live in the seed bank that are available for ducks and waterfowl to feed on, and then will regrow the next year, and will be there and responsive to the amount of water that might change from year to year is another important thing too. And the decomposition of these is actually really important in the spring for macroinvertebrates, which is all of your small animals that grow off decomposing vegetation and are very important for nutrient cycling throughout the ecosystem. When we think about how waterfowl use wetlands, it's primarily during the spring and fall migration periods, and especially when we talk about dabbling ducks, this shallow water design that we put into the wetlands is really important, because most of those ducks, they won't ever really use deep waters, which they use those top 18 inches. They like to forage in those areas. They feel safe in those areas. So having those like broad, shallow gradients is important for them. As the water fills up and recedes, they just have continual areas opening up to new feeding opportunities. Now there's other birds and other type of waterfowl that use different areas, like our mudflats are often used by shorebirds, and the deeper burrows that we build are used by diving ducks. But providing this opportunity for them to access a lot of different feeding resources is of real benefit, and it's part of why we think about how we design our easements to provide for that kind of thing. Macroinvertebrates, which I mentioned earlier, is kind of a catch-all term for all of these small crustaceans and insects, worms, a whole variety of different animals that, when this vegetation that grows naturally in the pools is submerged and then begins to rot, as you move into the spring and with the water being pulled off, this rotting vegetation allows these invertebrates to break down, feed on the algae that grows, feed on the bacteria that decompose these things. And they build up a ton of protein sources. And this food chain builds up and accumulates that protein in a way that provides a food source for all sorts of birds and animals and waterfowl and things that, is really important during the spring migration period as these animals move up to their breeding locations. They need to maintain good body condition. And protein is an important part of this that can often be overlooked. So by cultivating a natural moist soil management pool, we also provide this secondary nutrition source that is really important. Birds are a big part of the way we think about conserving our wetlands. One of the key focuses that we have to take into account is threatened and endangered species and migratory birds. Now, a lot of birds aren't doing that well in the US and across the world. We're seeing declines in a lot of species, but an important thing that we are not seeing to the same degree is a decline in water birds and shorebirds and water birds, dabbling and diving ducks, and geese and swans. These are all doing pretty well, and this really speaks to the value that wetland conservation has had across the United States. So the efforts done by landowners in Missouri, in this flyway, in this migratory pathway, it's bearing fruit, and that's a really exciting thing to see. And it means that the understanding of the ecosystem and of the environments that has been being nurtured in Missouri and across the U.S. in these wetlands is probably something that we need to learn from in other places, right? Like the work that's been done here can inform how we think about moving forward with conservation in other ecosystems. MRBO is an organization that has been doing surveys on the easements for birds during breeding and migration periods for quite a few years now. Over that period, they've observed a lot of different species, more than 200 species, utilizing the easements for shelter or food or reproduction. And they've even seen hundreds of these secretive marsh birds that really they're both often rare and endangered, and also very hard to find. And so the fact that they're using our easements means that we're providing good habitat. They have modeled bird presence or absence basically by bird type, by bird's life strategy, and these models have shown that the kind of water levels that we recommend on the easements, that 16 to 18 inch level, are one of the key predictors of bird diversity on these easements. So that's good. That's a proof of concept, along with all of the anecdotal observations, all of the on the ground things we see. This means that the ideas that are being acted out on these easements are having a positive effect and are in line with good science. So now this sounds like a little heretical, but as a person who's really interested in these kind of animals, not all animals are birds. And, in some ways birds are lucky. They can fly, they can move. If they decide something is not to their liking, they have the option to just pick up and leave. And, that doesn't always work out for them. But for a lot of animals that are small vertebrates, they don't have the ability to move long distances safely or to find new habitats, to colonize new areas in the way that birds do. And so when we think about what the easements do and how we could design them, we need to take into account that some of these other animals, they can't move that far. Like a lot of amphibians dry out if they're out of a good microhabitat. And so they can't go, miles and miles to find a new wetland. So this idea of connecting wetlands one to another, building on a system of wetlands and of creating these variations within the wetlands that provides them the kind of upland habitats they need, lowland habitats they need, variations in hydrology. All these are really important. And, the designing holistic, natural mimicking wetlands is a good way to incorporate these animals on a small scale as well. And of interest to a lot of people, our easements are not always 100% wetland. We're allowed to bring in a certain amount of acres when landowners want to put them in with eligible wetland acres. And there are plenty of areas adjacent that will also benefit from the wetlands. So when we think about improving habitat for T&E species, for migratory birds, for waterfowl, we can also look at how these habitats can have improvements done to them, or we can suggest improvements or encourage improvements that will also benefit all of these game animals that people are really interested in. And I think as PFQF biologists, this is a great opportunity for us to try to, bring some focus on those things to the easements and to thinking about conservation on the easements. So this is a property I've been working on recently that it's a wetland area is being restored. And in the process, we're going to incorporate some of the resources in the case of trees we have to take out to create habitat for quail and deer and rabbits and those kind of things. And we're going to do this by making small debris shelters that are good for the quail to use. And we're going to create a lot of food sources on the hillside. And the food sources will be various small berrying or shrubs. And these are great for quail, but they're also fantastic for the T&E species that we focus on. And so this is one of those good examples of how, a good habitat provides for a lot of different things. And if we can build a lot of complexity into our restorations, we will provide for a lot of things. And I think that's really great. So I'm hoping this one really bears a lot of fruit. And so to put thanks out, we are a pretty diverse team of people. We've got a bunch of great wetland biologists through MDC, like Mike McClure, Tommy Marshall, Neil Young, Sean Duckworth. We work with a lot of great people at NRCS who are part of the core of these programs. And we also work with a lot of ACES employees who are often retired wetland work or wetland easement employees, parts of the WETS team, who have come back out of retirement to, help keep the mission going. And and also not to forget the Ducks Unlimited wetland technicians that we work with as well. So a lot of people involved and a lot of enthusiasm. Kelsey pointed this out earlier, but this is the locations for our 4 teams. They're broadly northeast, southeast, southwest, and northwest. We're divided into 2 main teams, WETS West and WETS East. And we collaborate a lot together, and we just work on a ton of different easements all over the state. And of course, thanks to the PFQF staff who are available across most of the state now to help with upland habitat, CRP, all sorts of programs they work on. I will, I think, turn it over to Kim for a second now.
Yeah, perfect. Thanks, Jeff. I'll take it back over. I want to say thank you to Kelsey and Colby and Jeff. Thank you 3 so much for coming on tonight, giving that awesome presentation. I know I learned a ton about wetlands and WRE, and there's a lot of work that you all do that definitely brings some benefit to habitat and wildlife out there. So thank you for sharing all that information with us and with all the viewers tonight. We do have a little bit, we've got about 10 minutes left till 6 o'clock. So we've got time for a few questions. We're going to go through, we had some really great questions that people sent in while everybody was presenting. We answered a few of those as text in that Q&A feature, so you can find some answers in there. But there's a couple we're going to go over and have some of our presenters answer live. So I'm going to ask the first question. I'm going to send this one over to Kelsey. I'll give you that first question to answer, Kelsey. One that came in, as a member of the public or an individual or a non-landowner, what can folks do to try to help the wetland restoration efforts?
So first and foremost, the easy answer is buy a duck stamp. You know, that helps on numerous levels. A lot of the funds through the Pittman-Robertson go right into wildlife conservation and habitat, all that kind of stuff. So duck stamp, whether you hunt or not, it's a really cool souvenir. I mean, it's got that awesome picture on it in the front. And then I guess just spread awareness of the program. You know, keep your ears and eyes out for people who talk to you. If they have like a farmer, man, they're having trouble getting yield off this wet field, tell them to contact their local wetland office. Hey, have you heard of WRE? Or, you know, just send them our way and we'll take care of the heavy lifting.
Perfect. Thank you, Kelsey. I appreciate that. All right, we've got another question. This one, I'm going to send this one over to you, Colby. It was annual monitoring was talked a little bit about in the presentation tonight, the monitoring that you all have to do annually. What happens or what about the monitoring is done during hunting seasons? How do you deal with monitoring during hunting seasons?
I can't speak for everybody, but typically our monitoring is done in the first quarter of the year. We strive to get a head start on it and get it done early, and so that doesn't really coincide with too many hunting seasons. Besides maybe turkey season, we might run into some, but even if we did run into some hunting seasons, we have a pretty good relationship with our landowners that we know who's going to probably be out there hunting, and so we try to stay out of those and make sure we don't disrupt anybody. Obviously, we'll give a call out before we come out and monitor, so we'll make sure if anybody has any issues with that, you know, we'll try to reschedule. So.
Excellent. Thank you, Colby. Appreciate you answering that one. Those were the questions that we had sent in for us. We've got just a couple minutes left, but since we don't have any more questions that come in, we'll go ahead and wrap up for this evening. I just want to take a few minutes to thank everybody for your great questions. If you've got other questions that come up that you didn't put into the Q&A tonight, or if you've got additional questions that come up that you think of after this, definitely feel free to reach out to one of our specialists who are near you. I know they showed that map a couple times. You can see our staff map up here, all of our contact information for our wetland specialist, and then any of our other staff is on our website, and that's MissouriPFQF.org. If you find that there's not a biologist, one of our PFQF biologists in your county, you can also reach out to your MDC private land conservationist in your county for assistance, or you can contact your local NRCS WETS office. They'll be able to answer some questions, provide more information on WRE, on the Wetland Reserve Easement Program, and then how to get your land enrolled if that's something you're interested in doing. We'd also like to give a quick shout out, give a quick thanks to our partners over at Missouri Department of Conservation and at USDA, and that includes the Natural Resources Conservation Service, the folks at NRCS. They collaborate with us all the time to try to help us get more landowners enrolled in WRE and other conservation programs. So thanks go to them just for working with us and being great partners to try to help us get more habitat on the ground. And then again, thanks to everybody for joining our webinar tonight. Just a quick reminder, we will share the recording of this on our Missouri Quill Forever YouTube channel, and I'll be sending a link out for that recording to everybody who registered tonight. Again, if you've got questions, don't hesitate to reach out. You can, like I said, find our contact information on our website. You can email me. You can reply back to the email that I send with that recording link out. But like I said, if you've got questions, don't hesitate to follow us. And I'd also like to encourage you to follow us on social media. If you don't, we're on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And like I said, we've got that YouTube page. We try to post other webinars and events and things that we're doing on our social media. We try to share some cool habitat tips and things like that. So definitely check those out. But thanks again to our presenters who came on tonight and shared some great information. Thanks to everybody who tuned in to watch us tonight, and everybody have a good evening. Thank you.